What's up, everybody? Welcome to an initial impressions ramble for Ford Roll's Horus Heresy Book 8, Malevolence. Giving my initial impressions on that book, having just got it myself a few days ago, and starting to read into it. I'll give you some early impressions, first impressions, thoughts on that, and then wrapping up this video will be a thought ramble on the Horus Heresy series from Forge World as a whole. So, Book 8 is something that's pretty cool. I wanted to get the book. I didn't know how soon I'd be able to get the book. I was able to get it sooner than I thought, so I jumped on that opportunity, and here we are. So I've done the typical fanboy thing of looking at the pretty pictures and looking at the unit entries for the two new legions to be represented, and getting a feel for that. And then I started specifically reading, not from cover to cover, but I started reading the Blood Angels background info first, specifically because of how the Blood Angels Legion was kind of given a bit of an overhaul for its early days in terms of its fluff. Nothing radically changed once they truly become Blood Angels necessarily, but a bit of an overhaul. Because Sanguinus is up next on Primarch Purpose, which will happen sooner rather than later. And while in reading through this and knowing what was added to the Blood Angels fluff, and even his fluff, I feel the purpose that I think he was created for without this fluff is still more or less the same for the intents of that series rambling on about the Primarch's purpose. For more on that, check out the series itself, any of the Primarchs or anything like that. But anyways, my point is, I don't think his purpose necessarily changed with his addition of this fluff, but it's good to have a first-hand account of reading it before talking about Sanguinus, so that's why I'm doing that. That tangent aside, Book 8 continues the tradition of excellence in Ford Rule's capability of telling a documentary-style story. This is written not like a codex, which is just fluff overview for the sake of learning about a force and then collecting it. Not in a novel way, which is done, telling the plot of a particular story around a cast of characters and following them around in some cases pretty heavily and specifically. But rather, this is done in kind of a military battle documentary book, like as you might read about for World War One, World War Two, and the like. This is written with an in-universe point of view, as if you're some grand imperial scholar, and you're reading about this tumultuous period of the Horus Heresy. This is the style in which it's written, as if we are in universe, there ourselves reading about our past, and I really enjoy it. I really dig it. It's something that Forge will cut their teeth on with the Imperial Armor series. It is especially once they started doing campaign-driven Imperial Armor books, we really got to see the documentary style come into its own, and they do a really good job. I'd love to see 8th edition Imperial Armors from Forge World, because Forge was really good at doing this stuff, and I think the Horus Heresy series just proves that. So, Book 8, no exception. They continue that formula for success, and I think they do a good job just in and of itself with that formula. Now, as you start looking at what's represented specifically, I think they've done a good job. White Scars are a niche force if you're going to play them full on, straight up, pure maneuverability, as they are stereotypically thought of all the time, which is their strong suit and what they do, of course. But it also really hits them with the flavor. All the Forge World books have hit the legions they've covered with tremendous amounts of flavor. I'm looking forward to Book 9 for the Dark Eagles with that. So with the White Scars, it's going to help people have a real understanding of their Mongol Hun kind of inspiration, right? Until the Hun Mongol style of just pseudo inspiration, if you will, in terms of the artwork that you might see for White Scars here and there, the imagery of their weapons and any bits you might get from GW or Forge World, their unit ranking and structure, verbiage, and all that jazz, and special units and namings and all that. It's all hit heavy with that feeling, that flavor, which is what they've always had, but being that White Scars are not really written about much at all post-heresy, very few and far between, you might even have a real understanding of that. Outside of that, Coursera Khan kind of maybe would give you an inkling of an understanding, but outside of that, not much. So this is going to help definitely with that, and it really does work well for the White Scars. They definitely feel like White Scars 100% as a legion, and that's great. The Blood Angels, of course, they feel angelic. They've always been the Emperor's Angels of Death, literally embodying the idea of being angels. I mean, their Primarch is the angel, so I mean, it makes sense. And their backstory overhaul, since I've read the most on them, is pretty cool. I like it. Though I have to admit, a legion called the Revenant Legion still sounds pretty awesome. And that would be an awesome legion in and of itself in name. How they were carrying themselves doesn't really work out too well, which is why they became Blood Angels and they were able to stick around. So, all in all, just I think plenty of flavor to be had. I love two things aesthetically when it comes to Space Marine stuff and just things in general in fantasy, sci-fi, or fantasy. And that is pseudo ancient Egyptian aesthetic, inspirations, and then knightly or angelic knightly inspirations. A combination therein for that. The Blood Angels hit the angelic aspect very nicely, and I'm a big fan of it. So, jobs well done there. Their overhaul also begs some questions, raises some further questions for further rambles in the future, kind of one-off rambles in the future, so I won't go into that here, but there is stuff that makes you think, as there tends to be with these books, which is always fun as well. I do find it interesting that the Sanguinary Guard as a special unit are not included in Book 8. As far as I can tell, and if I'm mistaken, if they're just using one of their specialty names, I just didn't realize it, that's my bad, but from what I can tell, they are not specifically called out as Sanguinary Guard in any unit entry because they're not listed as a unit entry. They're in the fluff. They're just not a unit entry yet, as I can tell. And with that said, I don't remember Book 6 specifically bringing up anything unit-wise, because Book 6, which I'll get into in the second part of this ramble here, was just giving us the equivalent of chapter tactics for amongst them, the Blood Angels and the White Scars. So, anyways, I imagine book whatever that is the Siege of Terra book will have additional units for a multitude of legions present there. And I imagine the Blood Angels will get their Sanguinary Guard there alongside their leader as Kellyan. Will probably be those two things the Blood Angels get for that Siege of Terra book as additional units. I'm also hoping the White Scars will get an additional option for their Khan, their Great Khan, the Primarch. Jagadi Khan in the old fluff of the Siege of Terra, stood atop a Rhino transport and rode it into battle when they went and retook one of the spaceports. And that's awesome and cool and fantastic and silly, and I love it all at the same time. And while he has a fantastically awesome jet bike now, I really want, whatever Siege of Terra book number it is, I really want that to be an option, him to stand atop a Rhino. I think that would be great. So we'll have to wait and see. That's just a little hope of mine. But outside of those things, I think the book is doing a very good job. I like the fluff behind why the White Scars have those black armored or black colored Terminators amongst their forces. It makes a lot of sense. I really enjoy how the Blood Angels have a lot of foreshadowing to the Black Rage and Red Thirst, but more or less aren't subjected to it as in the form of a full-fledged popped curse like we see post-heresy, because while Sanguinus is still alive. They have that urge and that thirsting to contend with, but is nowhere near being a full-on, level 10 curse like it is after Sanguinus dies and post-heresy stuff. So, I think a really good job, job well done for Book 8, just giving us all this interesting information. There's demon stuff in here, there's Psi Arcana stuff in here, there's Custode stuff in here. So there's other additional things on top of just these two legions, as they tend to be in these books. So really think it's a solid book to pick up. If you're a Blood Angels fan or a White Scars fan, no brainer, pick this up. Even if, let me backpedal a little bit and say, yes, the books aren't cheap. However, if you're in the fandom and you really enjoy this time period of the timeline, or even if you're just a big fan of White Scars or Blood Angels, I think if you are able to swing picking it up at some point, you definitely should. Because the books are very well done, very good quality books in and of themselves. That alone, I think, is cool, and I think it's a great insight, if nothing else. So, just really cool to have. Expensive, as they always tend to be from Forge World, their books, but they're expensive. However, I feel it's justified in being worth it given the quality of the books released and the cool content therein and the way they do it in that documentary style. So, with all that said, this is book 8. We are 7 years in to this series from Forge World, and we still are missing one of the legions. The first legion, my personal legion, that I play and everything, or as a post-heresy chapter and everything like that, is still missing. It's going to be in book 9. We know that, but we're 7 years in. I think the biggest mistake they made is not having all the legions out ASAP. And might be a bit long-winded because I'm going to go on a bit of a ramble rant here, but the Great Crusade / Horus Heresy time period, of which we are looking specifically at the Horus Heresy with a lot of callbacks to the Great Crusade, is specifically the kind of origin story and rise and fall of the Astartes legions. The whole purpose for their creation was the Great Crusade. So we get to learn about their creation and their why and the how and the awesomeness behind it. The Horus Heresy shows how Primarchs, their legions, can lead the charge in tearing the galaxy asunder, and how they almost succeed in toppling the Imperium entirely and change it into the setting we know of in the actual 41st timeline. So, it's ultimately the Astartes story. As a result, getting the cool mechanical stuff like we do is great. Getting the interesting militia forces and Solar Auxilia forces and the idea of even Black Shield style forces during the Heresy and Shatter Legion stuff, interesting. Even the Talons of the Emperor, which I feel not legions, are a critical part of the story and do deserve to be told like they were in Book 7 and added to. They're still kind of second fiddle to the main fiddle, which is the Astartes. As a result, I feel Book 4 and Book 6 would ultimately mistakes / band-aids. Book 6 I can have an understanding for a bit more so, given I believe around that time period what happened to some of their staff and all that. I don't know if it happened before Book 6 or not. I can't remember exactly, but anyways, if that does hold true, I'm not going to get into it here. It's understandable for Book 6, and I'll give it a pass, and at least it gave us Legion-style chapter tactics, if you will, for the Blood Angels, White Scars, and Dark Angels. It kind of helped tide us over a little bit. Although not a new Legion in its entirety, showcase at least a little bit of something, right? But Book 4 ultimately I feel was a big mistake. Book 4 is also, I believe, the only book currently out of stock online. They see temporarily. We'll see if it comes back for Forge World. I don't think it's that much of a coincidence. Book 4 debuts Solar Auxilia. Cool, but no new Legion stuff. Not even a Band-Aid style thing, like what we got in Book 6. I mean, it talked about the Legions here and there and certain ones and whatnot, but it is a mistake because it didn't do anything to help set forth the story of the Astartes and the Horus Heresy because of them. And you can add all the additional stuff you want. They did mechanical alongside 4 legions. I mean, they don't need to just necessarily cut off a legion from a book to add something else to that book. Now, I get why, both on a monetary aspect as well as the ability to really delve into more of a legion when there's less legions per book to delve into. But when your first 3 books follow the same exact format of 4 legions per book, granted it's the Isfin trilogy as it's called now, because all those 3 books all focus around the whole Isfin sector of space and what happened there, and all the legions in those books are involved in that, so I get it. So regardless of that fact, you set a precedent by book. Once Book 2 came out, you've in essence set a precedent whether you like it or not. And what I mean by that is you set a precedent for a certain formula with the books. Legions in every book, 4 per book essentially. And I feel like their initial concept was 4 legions per every book, which would leave one book with only 2 legions in it. And in that book, much like in book 7, we would have 2 legions as well as the Talons of the Emperor, making up basically 4 things delved into on that level. We would have the Sisters of Silence and the Custodes, each be their own little like legion, thing, if you will, underneath the name of the Talons of the Emperor, like they are in book 7. And then you would have whatever 2 legions. Let's just use Thousand Suns and Space Wolves because it makes sense thematically. That would be one of the books. And then the 5th book, or one of the 5 for the first 5, would have 4, giving us 4 books of 4, which is 16 legions covered. 2 more left, 18 legions that we know about. And that would have been what book 7 is, with Talons of the Emperor as well as 2 legions. I think that might have definitely been their original strategy, and books 1 through 3 were kind of done in that strategy, and because they're all focused on Isfin, they more or less wrote them, I don't want to say 100% at the same time, but really close to each other in comparison to the other books. And then I think by book 2, they really realized the cash cow they had in the popularity, and they backpedaled on their plan, thus giving us book 4, which had nothing and was meant to be just kind of a filler book. And that's how it truly feels. Now, a book like that is no problem after all the legions are mentioned. Having additional campaign books after the mentioning of all the legions lets you expand upon the legions that make sense for the story of that particular campaign and all that jazz, as well as introduce new stuff without the worry, because new stuff is great, right? But we didn't know we needed it, or we didn't know we were missing out on Solar Auxilia or even the mechanical forces they introduced to us until we had them. Once we had them, I was like, man, that's cool. We must have been missing out. But we don't know that until we get it. We do know, however, the 18 established legions that, and the 2 lost legions we know nothing about, but the 18 established legions, we know about them. We know what we're missing out on when we don't get them in a book. Case in point, we're still waiting for the Dark Angels, and all the Dark Angels fans know what they're missing out on by seeing all the other legions with all the stuff they got, and how the Primarchs and their units are handled and their fluff is handled. Now, again, outside of the fact that I'm a Dark Angels fan, you could insert any legion in that scenario and it would be the same concept. So I'm looking forward to learning about the other wings, particularly the Dread Wing, and seeing the information, or reading information, seeing the imagery and all that there. It's still having to wait. Where, theoretically, if we didn't skip talking about the legions in any of the books, we would have had them all covered by now and have had the release of an expansion book, which maybe would see more units available for X, Y, and Z legions or whatever. So that's why I harp on that and why I constantly bring it up, is because while it's cool to get new stuff, we should have the old stuff, quote unquote, the established Astartes legions covered, not necessarily first, because again, they could have done the mechanical stuff like they did the mechanical stuff alongside in the first 3 books. Essentially, by book 3, we got a full-fledged mechanical army list, if you will, for the most part, done alongside the legion. So you can do stuff like that. But even if they didn't do that, we wouldn't necessarily be missing out, aside from saying, well, what about the non-Astarte stuff, and eventually get things. But when book 4 happened and no new legions were covered, a lot of people were like, well, where are the Ultramarines? Where are anything, right? Where are the Ultramarines? Where are the White Scars? Where are the Space Wolves? Where are the Thousand Suns? Where are the Dark Angels? Everybody's like, well, where are these legions? You didn't cover any of them. So, as much as I do thoroughly enjoy this series, the only book I don't own is book 4. Maybe once we get all the legions covered, once book 9 comes out, maybe eventually I'll backpedal to book 4 if it ever gets sold again. But I feel the big mistake was still having a legion to be covered now. If we just take one of the books, book 4, book 6, and put a legion in there, we wouldn't be in that scenario 7 years in. But hindsight's 2020. I don't want to sound like I don't enjoy the series. I do. I'm a big fan of it. I think they're doing a great job with it. This is how I like Space Marines as legions. They feel grandiose. They feel proper. I would love to play Warhammer 30k. A, it uses rules I'm most comfortable with, and B, a Space Marine Legion just feels right to me, and to see these rules fleshed out in their prime is fantastic. The Blood Angels not really afflicted with a curse in the way that we know it in 40k post-heresy stuff. The First Legion won't be bound by the shackles of having to hunt the Fallen at every waking breath in the fluff, it feels like, even though they can go decades without hearing any Fallen information. That's neither here nor there. We have the Iron Warriors, prior to having any chaos corruption amongst their ranks. We get to see their true capability as siege masters that they are. We get to see the legions, in certain ways at their height, the way they would never truly be again post-heresy for loyalist or traitor. So I really like that personally. I just enjoy that feel a lot. So I love the series. I just think 7 years out is a bit long to wait for all 18 legions to be covered. Did a good job, don't get me wrong. 7 years, 8 books. But within those 8 books should have been the 18 legions and then some by now. I don't know how long they plan to go. I do know that they also have the scouring to do after the Horus Heresy series. Forge World's plans are anyway. So we'll see how long that takes. After book 9, is it going to be 1 Siege of Terra book? Will it be 2? I don't know. Plenty of questions therein, but I do thoroughly enjoy the series. I think maybe they did drag their feet a little bit here and there in releasing the legions, but we're getting them. The fan base is still there. I'm still really intrigued, and hopefully book 9 is sooner rather than later. But anyways, I'm looking forward to continuing on my read of book 8. Looking forward to doing that Sanguinus Ramble and continuing that series on as well. If you own book 8 or plan to, what are your thoughts? If you own it, what are your thoughts? If you plan to own it, aside of monetary reasons, what reasons might you have for holding you back? And I get it on the monetary reason entirely. They are expensive books. But I think a worthwhile collector's piece to have, if that makes any sense, if you so desire, stuff like that. Anyways, share your thoughts on book 8 and on the Forge World Horus Heresy series as a whole. I will say this, it took them less time to make this progress than it took Black Library, and with less books to boot. So there's that. Anyways, thanks very much for sticking through it. And don't forget to hit that subscribe button if you want to be part of future conversations like this or anything else. And until next time, thank you very much and take it easy.